Okay. How many of you ever heard of Big History Project? Okay, one of you, yes. All right, good. The rest of you will hear a lot about it. So I'm Bob. I work in Bill Gates' private office. I'm not part of the foundation, not part of Microsoft. I hang out in Bill's office, like basically in a shed in the backyard, just making stuff for teachers. That's my job. And it's the best job in the world, because I get to make stuff that we think no one else is making, and then we talk about it so that we try to get other people to make it. And the big thing is it's all about teachers. What can we do to make teachers better, to really help them do a better job? Most of my life in technology has been spent thinking about technology. What can we do to help types of learning that wasn't previously possible? And it turns out that was kind of not really the right way to focus. Because if you're only focused on the kid, then you're not really focused on the classroom, and you're not really focused on what kinds of learning practices happen across a group of kids. So instead, this time we're like, well, what if we really think about the teacher? And that's actually had huge impacts for us, and it's been really important. Now, we still end up with all these transformative experiences for kids, but the teacher is a much better place to start. So as Tim mentioned, I was a classroom teacher. I worked at Adobe kind of thinking about disability access. That's how I met Alan Foley in the back, who's clearly enthralled by my talk because he's reading his phone. He's an old friend, so calling him out and humiliating him is really just part of the gig. Yeah, exactly. So the point being that I spent time doing this stuff in thinking about what can we do to make things better. Anyway, I'm rambling now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the Big History Project. I'm going to talk about where it came from. But really what I want to try and do is use that as an abstract lesson about what makes good free content, what makes good uses of technology. We'll raise questions about that. There's another session after this where we'll go into a little bit more detail, and we'll look at what we were going to look at a lot of activities, but it turns out FedEx is not perfect. So all of the materials that I had printed out for this talk are on a truck somewhere, and we don't know where. So we're going to do some stuff. We're going to be winging it this afternoon, or later this morning. So it'll be fun. Okay, so the Big History Project was one of the first things that came out of Bill Gates' private office, right? So he leaves Microsoft and he says, okay, what am I going to do? You know, the foundation's doing their thing. What am I going to do? And in his spare time, Bill does a lot of online courses. He's always, and you know those DVDs, the great courses? You ever hear that advertised on podcasts and stuff like that? So they're not cheap. They're pretty good. They're not awesome. I don't love them. Bill loves them. I don't love them because it's just a bunch of professors lecturing for hours and hours and hours. And each DVD set costs about $300.
They're cheap on Audible.
They're cheap on Audible. Yes, you can take them on Audible for nothing. Well, if you buy Audible, yeah. So Bill takes one of these courses, and whenever he likes a book or he likes a course, he'll call the author and say, can you come and hang out? And they always say yes. And they turn up in the office. And so out of this came the idea that this big history course that he takes. And I'll explain what big history is in a minute. And so they decide, hey, let's make a course out of this for high school. Because if history had been like this when I was a kid, I would have loved history. And so we thought we'd do it for a couple of years, and then we'd give the course to the University of Michigan or Macquarie University in Sydney, where that first professor was from, and they would just teach it, and Bill would give them some money to keep teaching it for a while. What we learned was that actually no one else is doing OER this way, open educational resources or free curriculum, free textbooks. No one's really doing it this way. So how do we take this and keep experimenting, and we keep adding on experiments and adding on experiments and adding on experiments to it. And so now we're actually going to expand. And we're going to go from one history course to 3. We're going to start adding science courses and start thinking about how do we actually change the publishing industry and transform that. And having served a year and a half in the Pearson Penitentiary, I think that's a good thing to do. And granted, there are a lot of really good people. I say this with love because there are a lot of good people that I really, really respect still doing time. So, we'll go from there. So let's talk a little bit about what is big history for those of you that are not familiar with it. So big history is the biggest possible history course you can make, because we start with the Big Bang and we end with the future. So roughly 14 billion years worth of content, and so what happens is you're talking about a series of thresholds, right? So these moments where the universe became more complex and there's no going back. So with the Big Bang, you get all matter and energy formed. You end up with just loose bits of matter floating around. All of a sudden, gravity starts working even at the atomic level. You get the first stars. First stars run out of fuel, they start blowing up, and it's in the death of those stars. It's the only way things can get hot enough. What's up, Al? You gotta dim the lights? It's all right. We'll figure it out. Where's the lady with the blazer? She has like one of those lacquered name tags that would imply authority on this kind of thing. It's all right. So first stars blow up, and you get, and that's the only way things get hot enough to form most of the chemical elements out there in the universe. Gold can only be formed in the death of a star. So from that point on, in the leftover detritus of the death of stars, the same process happens again. They all pull together. New stars are formed out of that, except not all of that stuff ends up in the new stars. You end up with some of that stuff floating around, 0.01%, and that stuff starts coagulating together and you get planets. Out of that comes Earth. So all of these different elements that we find here on Earth are there. If you have just the right conditions, not too close, not too far away, not too hot, not too cold, you get life. You get just the right conditions for life. And then from there, if you get just the right conditions, sentient beings, known as humans, are formed. And if you think about what makes humans different, this is one of the questions we ask kids. They love this question. What makes humans different from other species? Is it learning? Well, no, dolphins, it turns out, learn pretty well. Is it language? Well, dolphins also have language. So in David's mind, David Christian, it is the idea that humans learn from one another collectively, from one generation to the next. So even though other species learn, it turns out that humans can learn from each other from one generation to the next. So in about 10,000 years, we can go from making fire and lighting things to using iPhones. And now from there, eventually, the humans start wandering the earth, we're eating everything, and then we as as a species, massively overpopulate the earth. We start having population crashes, all kinds of bad things happen. So we have this great technological innovation called farming. And we're able to generate a ton of calories, and this is a fascinating process, isn't it? I'm captivated by it. So we develop farming, and through farming we develop civilizations. We start stabilizing, and this is usually where your average world history course picks up. Now, about 250 years ago, we learned how to use energy in massive quantities. The Industrial Revolution is formed, and we start this process that we now refer to as the Anthropocene. There's a new geologic epoch that has started, and then we go to the future, right? So that's a you think about your average world history class. We'll start with the dawn of humans, right? You'll probably cover Neanderthals, a little bit of maybe Cro-Magnon, and then you'll go to early civilizations, and as quickly as possible you get to Greece. We start a lot sooner, right? And so one of the things that ends up happening is people go like, how come, can we skip the whole thing about the non-humans? Can we go right to the humans? And I don't want to do all the science stuff. I'm like, well, you can't really do that. And there's a couple of reasons. There's a couple of things that we're trying to do here from a history perspective. Number one, the first half of the course, we're trying to set up a focus on, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more, we're trying to set up an understanding of how natural resources play a role in history. So if you look at what's happening in Syria right now, is that are the US and Russia staging a proxy war in Syria because we're all really deeply invested in the culture of Syria? I would argue not. I would argue there's something to do with natural resources there. It's really a proxy war over oil. But I'm just an old academic. So anyway, but the point being that we need to be thinking about the role of science in our thinking about history. The other thing that ends up happening in the beginning of the course is we do a lot of case histories, a lot of intellectual history. So when we're looking at the Big Bang, or let's take the second unit on stars, third unit rather, we often talk about Copernicus and Galileo. We'll advance that narrative to include Edwin Hubble, Henrietta Leavitt, and look at an intellectual history. Too often with history, we just sort of do one civilization after another, one thing after another. What we want to do is sort of look at more singular strands and how things are connected. Now, the other thing that we're trying to do here is actually create a coherent narrative. And you can ask any kid that's come out of the class and say, all right, tell me the story of this class in like a minute. And they can tell you. And they can point to all of these thresholds. And it not only tells them how what they're doing now connects to what they did before, it also tells them how it connects to what's to come. And it turns out that's actually really, really important. We don't, too often in many of our classes, we isolate what we're teaching to just a bunch of isolated facts. We want them to learn those facts, maybe we want them to learn some skills, but we don't talk about how it's all interconnected and how it all ties in. In this course, we do that. And I think actually, even if you look at like a world history course, I think kids would struggle to be able to give you those kinds of narratives. I think in a science class, it's particularly hard. Forget math. I mean, how are you going to create those kinds of coherent narratives in math in terms of what you're trying to teach people? And in terms of the way our brain works, there's a guy that Alan and I study with at the University of Wisconsin named Jim G. He's a really, really good writer. He does a lot of stuff on gaming, so we tease him for that because it's kind of funny. Like I think he did it just to get on the cover of Wired. But the brain is not a computer. We don't just try to memorize facts. We don't actually compute things particularly well with our brain. What we do is tell stories. We're really good at telling stories. And we will actually accept stories even knowing that some of the pieces of it do not make sense. We will ignore the fact. I mean, just take what happened on Tuesday. I mean, we will ignore facts, no problem, in order to make a coherent narrative and string things together. But when we're thinking about our curriculum, we ignore that. We ignore the fact that the component facts that we're trying to give the kids don't always amount to a coherent whole. So having these narratives is actually really, really important. Now, in addition, we also focus a lot on skills. Right? And this is important. For those of you that are not history teachers, this is going to be important later. But we try to be really, really clear about which skills we're just going to hammer on over and over and over and over again, to the point where the kids are a little bit like gravity affects them differently when we mention these things. It's just like, oh God. But we're trying to build that. We're trying to build this up. So this notion of scale in history, we want kids to be able to go up and down in terms of scale regularly and quickly. What kinds of questions happen when you're thinking about things that happen within a certain proximity versus what was happening in China at the same time? If you make a comparison between US history and China at the same time, what kinds of questions are going to emerge versus if you're just thinking about what's happening in that part of the United States? What's going to happen if you think about questions in a 250-year time scale versus a 10,000-year time scale? It's all about developing better questions. In this class, we introduce new disciplines every unit, and we encourage the kids to think about their own disciplines. So we'll have an activity where we'll say, okay, I was doing one of these in Lincoln, Nebraska, and the kids had to put together a SWAT team. It's like, okay, we found a pile of bison bones, and we think they're about 10,000 years old. Why? What happened here? Why would 10,000 bison die in one place about 10,000 years ago. And was it hunting? Was it a natural disaster? You know, is there something we don't understand about the Native American populations? What was going on there? Okay, assemble your team. And so, of course, there's historians. We need someone who really understands the cultural practices of Native Americans. But they also had some biologists. Someone wanted an anthropologist there. And of course, somebody wanted Richard Branson. He was like, he's rich, he can just hire a whole bunch more people. And you're like, okay, that's cheating. But again, what we're trying to do, and this is one of the challenging things about the course, we want the insights of all kinds of other disciplines to help us form better questions as historians. So the other thing that we'll do, and this is one of the most persistent things that sticks with the kids, is what we call claim testing. So we give the kids a really simple set of rules. All right, so you're faced with a claim. So what are the four tests are, how does it jibe with your gut? What's the instinct? The second one is what's the evidence? The third one is what's the authority? And the fourth one is what's the logic? And you just go through systematically, one by one. How does this work? When we start off in the beginning of the year, we'll actually just give them claims and have them react to it. Over time, we're going to want them doing that in the classroom. So instead of a kid just challenging you like a little turd in the classroom, you want them saying, no, use claim testing, claim test me. And then you want them to use that with one another. And then you want them using it in their writing. So it shapes their reading, it shapes the classroom, the accountable talk in the classroom, it shapes their writing practices. And then in terms of the core concepts, this idea of thresholds, which I've already mentioned, and establishing that narrative. The idea of collective learning, like whenever we're introducing new disciplines or we're introducing these case histories, we're really trying to progress how on individual topics, whether it's technology, medicine, particular topics in science, how we see transitions over time, how humans have been sort of progressively understanding more and more. The other thing that is important to us is this idea of origin stories. Now, in some communities where we teach, the idea of teaching the Big Bang and evolution may result in a gasp or two, some hushed like, oh my God. But we frame it as an origin story, that the course itself is let's compare it, right? So in Greek mythology, humans were born out of the head of Zeus. There's a different origin story in different African cultures and Native American cultures. The Judeo-Christian origin story is born out of the Bible, and then we have this one, which is coming out of science. Whenever we're working with kids, and we have families that we do have schools where they have to send the kids from one church like out in the hallway during that period of when they're talking about evolution of the Big Bang. But most of what we're saying is like, look, we're not asking you to believe it, but this is a dominant narrative in our culture. We do expect that you can engage with it thoughtfully, and you can claim test the heck out of it. And there are people now. Does anyone listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast? Yeah, Star Talk. You should totally listen to this. It is the best podcast ever. Huh?
It's on TV too.
It's on TV too?
Yes.
Oh, I've never seen it on TV. I travel all the time, so I'm always listening to podcasts. Like I'm kind of obsessed with podcasts. I don't know what I'm going to listen to now. I guess they're going to keep. I mean, all of the election podcasts were all just about what crazy things have been said, and I think that we've got a lot more of that to come. So I guess I can keep listening to my podcast. But the Star Talk is Neil deGrasse Tyson with some kind of brilliant theorist and a comedian, and it's always great. If you like Bob's Burgers, anyone like Bob's Burgers? So Eugene Melman, who plays Gene, he's on it a lot. Chuck Nice is a rapper, he's very funny. He's on it a lot. And if you think about the Big Bang origin story, he's actually done a number of episodes recently which basically points out that maybe we have it wrong. Maybe it's not a Big Bang, maybe it's a big bounce. They're like, what happens when the universe reaches a natural limit? Does it just collapse and start over again? Has anyone seen the movie Interstellar? Matthew McConaughey? I mean, come on, this is Christopher Nolan. This is a great movie. So in there, they're laying out another set of theories around string theory that maybe we can navigate through multiple dimensions. There was a podcast recently that talked about the fact that it explored the question whether or not our reality is nothing more than a simulation that's been created by some 14-year-old extraterrestrial species sitting in his own garage. What's the likelihood that we are all like just basically characters in a SimCity, in a very advanced version of SimCity? Which of course is, that's like a great freshman philosophy class, right? And what goes on. But it highlights the point that origin stories are just that. Like, there are multiple explanations. The one that we're putting forth here is the one that we think is most likely, but in fact, even among godless communist academics, there are other narratives that are emerging that are growing. So we'll keep hammering on this, and through the whole time, we have a very clear point of view on reading and writing, right? And this is a really hard thing to do, because you guys are teachers, right? You all know how to teach reading. Every single one of you in this room is a reading teacher. You know that in theory, you accept it sometimes a little bit like, nah, that's not my job. Like, I'm a history teacher, I don't have to teach reading. No, you do. But the challenge that we have is sometimes we have teachers who are really good at it. They take that responsibility really seriously. Other teachers, not so much. And others are just, inexperienced and new to the profession. And so how do you build in supports that kind of help scaffold that kind of reading? What kinds of tools do we need to provide teachers with reading? And then in terms of writing is probably for us the most important skill that we develop through the entire course. We do a ton of writing, and helping people learn to teach writing is really tricky and really challenging. So, do I talk about this? Hold on. I do talk about writing. So but one of the things that we've really tried to do is figure out how can we get student writing. We measure it 3 times a year. I'll show you the results. We'll talk about that. But the big question that we're left with is, how do we make writing even better? How can we help get kids ready? If in terms of getting ready for advanced courses, for AP courses, getting them ready for college entrance exams, they're going to have to write. And that's the one enduring skill that we can give kids that can push them forward. Now, if you're going to do a textbook starting today, this whole arrangement where I have to stay in front of this thing is really, really hard. So we started with a lot of videos and a lot of articles, and basically because the course had started as one of the great courses, it was just a bunch of lectures. So what they did is they said, okay, let's just point a camera at some of these professors, and we'll call it a course. Many people do that now. Like, have you guys seen Crash Course? Any of you use Crash Course in your stuff? Yeah, how many of you guys use Crash Course? I'm just at it. One? Okay, the same guy. You're like, dude, you're going to be teaching this course next year, I'm sure of it. So you see this a lot. Khan Academy does the same thing. They just have videos, and it's all delivered via video. Now, it turns out that's not actually a course. That's not how things actually work. That's not how kids learn. It is super, super helpful, but it's like a guest lecture. It's not necessarily how we're going to get things going. We have a lot of articles. I think in total we have like 120 different articles, and I don't think I talk about this anywhere else. I was going to talk about it this afternoon. I had all kinds of examples that are now on a truck. We're a 9th grade course, right? And so it turns out with readings, not all of our kids are at the 9th grade reading level. Like, sometimes we have 7th grade classrooms that are teaching our stuff, and some of those kids are not at the 9th grade reading level. It turns out a lot of 9th graders aren't at the 9th grade reading level. It turns out a lot of seniors aren't at a 9th grade reading level, and the texts are hard for them. So what we did is we said, okay, well, what can we do to help them? And so we did a couple of things. First thing that we did was we hired Newsela. Do you guys know Newsela? Have you ever seen this? If you're not familiar with Newsela, you should be. It's a lovely service. And what they'll do is they'll take news articles every single day, and they have this room fulls of editors, and they rewrite them at different Lexile levels. And so they make them more complex and less complex. So you can find things that are at the appropriate level for those kids. What's interesting about them is that they'll publish this every single day, and it allows you to have a conversation where everyone can read the same thing. They get basically the same facts. You lose some nuance with kids who are reading the lower levels, but you get the same basic information. So you can have one conversation. You're not excluding a group of kids who might be behind. So your English language learners can still be in the mix. So we did that with all of our articles. And it's been a really interesting process. What happens? Who gets to choose? Does the grown-up get to choose? Does the kid get to choose? How do you choose what's gonna be in there? Now, tools like Newsela. The other one I would recommend is based here in New York. It's called ReadWorks. Are you familiar with them? Tons and tons of free online reading material. And they develop, and again, they use a very similar reading methodology to the ones we use. So they'll do things like give you the questions at the factual level, the conceptual level. They have pair text. They have systems like an article a day. It turns out just reading a really simple article at a level, even if that level is well below your grade level, just to develop background knowledge, has a huge impact. It's a really, really important thing. Well, from there we started doing a lot more, and we started developing classroom activities, and all of those are coming from the teachers. So when we started, you just went to the teachers. We started off with 6 schools, right? And went to the teachers that have been teaching it, saying, okay, so walk me through a year. Interview them, you take their best activities and you just steal them. And you make your own, you just write them up. And then every year we change about 10% of the course, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We keep looking for new activities that teachers are coming up with, and more details on how people are teaching the activities. In most textbooks, it's just a one-way conversation. They tell you what to do, and you put it on the shelf and ignore it, and that's just how it goes. If you happen to use any of that stuff, there's no one else knows about it, and none of it ever ends up in the next edition because they just hire another group of young faculty members from universities like the one here, and they cement it yet again for another 7 years. So I think that's one of the most important things about textbooks being online, is that they can be changed every single year. It's a website. It's super easy to change. Okay, so we did some project-based learning. It turns out unless you're are you guys project-based learning schools? There's like 3 schools in the room. Are you guys project-based learning? No? Okay, if you're not a project-based learning school, trying to do 2 weeks of project-based learning is kind of, you could do projects in 2 weeks, but you can't do project-based learning in 2 weeks. So that hasn't worked out as great for us. And the investigations that we do, these are the writing activities. How many of you are familiar with the document-based question or DBQ project? Okay, it's the same guy. See, okay, you're right there. So this is a particular kind of writing assessment where you give kids a set number of articles to read, you give them a set amount of time to read it, and then you give them a set amount of time to write a response to it. This is what you're going to be doing on the AP exams. This is what you're going to be doing on the SAT. This is the writing assessment, how things are going to go. And frankly, as standardized tests go, it ain't bad. It's better than what we had before. It's certainly better than a multiple choice test. It still results in like really, really formulaic approaches to writing. But if more of our students ended up following that formula, at least journalism would improve quite a bit. So I'd be okay with that. So you'll see that. Now let's talk a little bit about big history, just to give you a sense of how big we are. It looks like this year we're going to be in about 1,500 schools. I think I've upped this forecast to 1,550 schools. And this is one of the things that's kind of interesting. I can tell you I know how many teachers are using our stuff because they log in and we track that and we go, oh, wow. Like we offered a summer training online. It's actually still going on. You can do it now. But we know every single month how many people, I can look at any given, I can pull up the website now. I don't have the wireless password. I don't need the wireless password. I will need the wireless password this afternoon, but you can help me with that, right? Okay, see, I told you she's got a lot of authority. It's the name tag, probably, and also her sheer brilliance. But the point is that we can track these kinds of things. And this is a little bit weird. Like, I did my time in the academic space, I did my time in the classroom, I did my time in corporate America, and I did my time in Pearson. Each one of those kind of scars you in particular ways, right? And so one of the outcomes of being a corporate guy is I just sort of track things. I just go, it's like, what are the sales metrics on stuff that's free? But it's really interesting because if you think about it, a textbook company, when they sell a textbook to whoever it is in your district they're selling things to, they go, oh, I sold 20 copies. They don't care what happens after that. They really don't. Because, I mean, how many of you actually use your textbook versus let it rot on your shelf? See? Yep. You use it a little. You can't be like, I write all my own stuff in all my free time. You don't. You use something. Something's coming from somewhere. But they don't track it. We don't have that. Like, there's no sales, there's no selling free stuff. So we have to kind of figure out, like, how many schools are using this? How many teachers are using it? How many kids are using it? And we have to track all of that kind of stuff. So we can go to Bill and say, we're having a huge impact. But I think this is one of the big gaps that a lot of the free curriculum providers have out there is they don't track this stuff in any kind of sophisticated way. So they have no idea if it's working. So they can't get any more money to say, I'm impacting this huge number of people. If you can't make that case, then why would anyone give you any funding? You can say, we're really hugely important. And you may in well fact be really hugely important. But no one believes you because they don't have any data to back it up. So let's take a look. This is one of the things. Now, I actually, in all fairness, I thought this was going to be a room full of Edtech people. I didn't realize I was talking to like regular like superstar teachers. So, but here's the most important thing I wanted to talk about. And I think when you talk to Edtech people, they kind of lose sight of this, right? So, this is one of the other surveys that we give. And we look at, like, are you teaching the course as a history course? Are you teaching it as a world history course? Are you doing some kind of science integration, that kind of stuff? This other lower one, that one is more about, like, are you teaching it in a year, a semester, a trimester, multi-year, that kind of stuff. But the big one is the one I want to talk about is this. So we ask folks, this is an online course. And as of when I grabbed this data, 40% of the teachers are accessing it online. On an online course, another 6% are going to an LMS, they download everything, and they put it onto an LMS of some kind. Google Classroom, Schoology, Edmodo, whatever. But 54% of them are in a situation like this. It's not a one-to-one environment. It is a teacher with a projector and a bunch of printouts. And I think that you think about that, right? Like, I've been studying Edtech since 1993. And we thought for sure by now that every kid would have a computer of some kind. How many of your classrooms are one-to-one? It's the same guy. See, look at that. You just leave your hand up from now on. But that's not the norm. And so, and again, this goes back to this question about, do we create transformative learning experiences for kids, or instead do we create transformative teaching experiences for teachers and supports for teachers? And you really have to sort of think about that in that way. The teacher is still the person who's responsible for kind of coordinating, and they're the ringmaster. They're the ones kind of circulating everything. Okay, I'm going to blow through some data. It turns out people like us. We do a lot of surveys, and I want to highlight this I want to highlight a couple of different things here, right? So 94% of the teachers, this is the 5th year we've been doing this, 94% of the teachers at the end of last year tell us, yeah, I'm happy with the course. And we have a small group every year that we survey. And it's pretty consistently been that way. We've gone up a little bit. Every year I tell Bill, there's nowhere to go but down. And in fact, we're still hanging in. I think somewhere along the line we're going to get big enough that we're going to end up sampling this and we're going to end up going down. We try to do some comparisons. how does this compare, how do normal history teachers view their stuff? And they do like their stuff. Teachers, by the way, are incredibly kind people. If you ask them if they like something, their inclination is always to say, yeah, I like it. I'm pretty happy with how things are going. I really wish I could do this survey after I reach a certain level of intoxication. Like I could give them 2 or 3 pints of truth serum and then survey them and find out what they really think. That's where I really know with teachers how we're doing. But here's the point that's interesting, I think, from an Edtech standpoint. We survey the heck out of teachers. If you've signed up for our site, you're going to get requests to do surveys. Like, I'm really tired of writing surveys, I'll tell you that. But we also try to show everyone what we do with the survey data, right? We'll share the survey data, and if people tell us they don't like something in the course, we try and change it. We'll use the survey data. We actually track how much people use everything on the site. One of the projects I'm doing right now is doing this on the flight yesterday because my brain wasn't able to do anything yesterday except look at data. And I was looking at what videos are people using the least, or at least, and what I'm particularly looking for is what videos were being started and stopped before people got halfway through. What falls into that bucket? And we're gonna do new videos based on that. And so I'm gonna call my buddies at Crash Course and be like, okay, we got some new videos we're gonna do this year. So we use this data, and it turns out that the fact that we use it, teachers know that we use it, and so they take it seriously. Now, here's a hypothesis. I have no data to prove this particular hypothesis, but the fact that people are actually taking our surveys really, really seriously, I think has a positive impact on professional development. I think you consider that reflection. Because the question we're asking is, what's working in your classroom? And that's sort of that's the seed. That is the absolute core of what makes good professional development, is asking that question and coming up with answers to it. So that's why I think actually all these surveys is actually kind of a good thing, even though it's kind of a hassle. All right, let's talk a little bit about writing and where we end up. And I'll try and, I'm not going to go into as much detail on this just because it's only going to be interesting for about a couple minutes. But in the course, we collect writing samples at 3 points over the year. I think this past year, we had about 3,000 samples. Oh wait, no, this is last year. We had 1,700 samples, but it was the exact same 1,700 kids that we were looking at. Beginning, middle, and end of the year. So the first week, it's actually more like the first month. No one ever does what we say they should do, but about the first month, about February, and towards the end of the school year. They do the investigations, those DBQs, and then we were collecting this information, and we have grad students at University of Michigan that do all the scoring. And then this one professor who ends up not trusting his grad students, and he grades them all himself anyway. So. And then we have another company that takes all of that data, and we do a statistical analysis to make sure that they're applying the standards in a consistent way. And they're actually pretty good.